this painting is trying to show the diversity of birds that we have in India. And you can see this something like a swan on the left, that big white bird. It's a swan or a goose type of bird. Below that you have maybe a falcon, and we'll be talking about falcons today, Amur falcons. On the right of the swan type bird, you have a heron, you have ducks, you have parakeets, you have, I think, what is a hoopoe, and you have another kind of stork kind of bird. And I think there's a peacock right in the center, on the top. And this is just to show you that birds have always been a very deep part of our culture in our country, and not just our country, around the world. In fact, birds are the most studied wild animals in the world. People have always had a lot of literature, books and poems and stories about birds. And I think it's because birds are basically everywhere. You don't have to go to Corbett Tiger Reserve to see a bird. You can actually see a bird outside your window. This is a famous painting called The Goldfinch by Carol Fabricius. And the goldfinch is this beautiful bird that you find in the steppes. It's right there in the painting. And this is a chained goldfinch. And it's actually a very sad painting because the bird kind of looks sad. And it became a very popular painting at the time that it was made, because at that time, nobody used to make paintings of birds. People made paintings of people or gods. And I think it got a lot of people thinking as well as to, why that bird is feeling so sad. And this brings me to my next point, which is what really are the challenges and the opportunities that we have in front of each other in India to kind of conserve wild birds that we have in India. So what is a wild bird? We will start with that. Then we'll go to what conservation really is, because there's some confusion as to what conservation is, what people like me and my colleagues at BNHS do. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What has the world done for wild birds? We'll talk about that as well, in the sense that what are the kind of laws or the regulations that are there for wild birds. Believe it or not, there are a lot of laws and conventions to save birds across the world. And then we'll talk about community conservation in Nagaland and Manipur, which is the Amur Falcon Project, and with which we have been associated for the last 6 years. And finally, we'll talk about what could be the non-legal ways of conserving birds, because at the end of the day, it is also a lot about love. It is also about what you feel in your heart, and how that reflects in society's choices, because ultimately it is not conservationists like me or anybody else. It is all of society as a whole that decides that we need to conserve birds. I'm going to start with this beautiful bird that I saw yesterday outside my window. This is a rosy starling. It's a cousin of the common mena that we often see. And the best part about the rosy starling is that it has come from the steppes, that is Central Asia and Europe. And it comes to India every winter. It stays for a long time, almost for 6 months, and it comes to Bombay and Maharashtra as well. And now it's going to be on its way back to the steppes. And this beautiful bird comes in huge flocks, and it creates this incredible formation in the sky known as murmurations, in which you have hundreds of birds together flying. They look like fish in the sea, meaning it's a big flock that flies together. They never bump into each other. They just fly together in this beautiful way. And this is the amazing thing about migration, that birds remember every time where to go. Birds remember every time where they have to stop, and they remember the routes, and they teach each other. They teach the flock. It's called peer learning. So in the way that when we were in school, we would teach our friends the things that we knew, and the class learned together. Migratory birds teach each other as well. And that is something, probably the most magical aspect of wild birds. And this is my favorite bird, the coppersmith barbet. I'm starting with the wild birds that I see outside my window. I'm hoping that you also get to see these birds, because these are common city birds. And I'm also hoping that, from tomorrow and the days to come, you're going to look at all these birds that are very close to you. So this is the coppersmith barbet. It's mainly a fruit-eating bird, and this is a courting pair. It's the mating season right now. They're here on this people to eat the figs on the tree that you can see, and they are basically will go from tree to tree looking for fruit. And this brings me to my next point, which is when we talk about a wild bird or even a wild animal, we need to think about what that animal or bird may be doing in a day. So, for example, the bird has to find food, the bird has to find water, the bird has to find somewhere to breed, to nest, and all of these are important considerations for us to keep in mind as conservationists. I think a couple of participants have raised their hands. If my colleagues could please check on them. I also want to say that if you have questions, then you can write them in the chat box and I will answer them. You're free to ask me questions during the course of the session. I'll do my best to address them. We'll also have a separate question answer session at the end. Okay, so the coppersmith barbet loves these big, beautiful neem and peepal trees, and it will eat the fruit of these trees. And what do we do at BNHS? One of the main thrusts of our activity is to study wild animals and to study birds, to understand, where what they eat, where they nest, where do they reproduce, and what are the needs that they have. With this scientific research, we try to inform governmental policy and law. We try to make sure that the needs of these wild animals are first studied, understood, and then put into policy and into practice. So I just want to show you how this bird looks when it calls. It's got this beautiful tuk-tuk call. Just observe the behavior of the bird. Showing you this is that I just wanted to say that every bird will have a different way that it calls, a different way that it behaves. Some are more shy, some are less shy, and we need to understand the relationship the bird has to the tree or to the place that it lives in order to understand how to conserve it. It may not be enough just to grow one kind of tree. We may have to grow many kinds of trees or do many kinds of interventions, right? This is another very common bird known as tota in Hindi or mittu, right? So this is the rose-ringed parakeet, and it's eating samal flowers. The samal is an Indian tree native to India. It has just stopped blossoming. The flowers have just fallen from the tree, but it's a great tree that supports a lot of bird species, and this is basically a parakeet eating its breakfast. And the reason I'm showing you the picture of the parakeet is because I want to say that this is actually a wild bird, but it is a bird that is in the pet trade, which is illegal. We have something known as the Wildlife Protection Act in India. And according to the Wildlife Protection Act, which was made in the 1970s, 1972, it says that you can't actually be hunting or catching or trapping any wild bird or animal that is found wild in India. So you can have an African grey parrot, though I don't recommend it. I would say it's not a good pet. The only good pets to have are probably dogs. But the rose-ringed parakeet you cannot keep as a pet. It's actually illegal. If you ever find a bird that is sick or tired or has fallen in your garden or something and you take care of it, then you are allowed in the sense that it's seen as an action in good faith, but you can't actually keep it in a cage and keep it at home. That's actually breaking the law. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later. I want to talk about what the world is doing for birds. And before I go there, I want to talk to you a bit about the flyways of the world. Some of you may not have heard this word before, flyway. Even I hadn't heard it till a few years ago. A flyway is basically a path that a bird will take to migrate, right? And usually there are 9 flyways of the world. You can see the map India is right in the center in the lime green. So we form part of the Central Asian flyway. So usually this is birds coming from north to the south. So this is, I showed you the picture of the rosy starling, right? So the rosy starling is coming from Central Asia or Eastern Europe, and it's coming down towards India. And it comes down towards the beginning of winter. We're also going to talk about Amur falcon, which also comes from Amur and Siberia and comes down to India, but it crosses over to Africa. So it's actually part of two flyways. But just to say that, you know, we often think jungli janwar hai, we often think, you know, animals are wild and they kind of like, there's no logic to what they do, but actually nothing is further from the truth. As somebody who studies birds, I can tell you that in fact birds hardly ever waste any time. They seem to know what they're doing all the time, in the sense that they're always looking for food, or they're always trying to protect themselves. They're never just sitting idle. And a lot of migratory birds that I see every year come to the same tree, to the same wetland every year. That's because they're territorial, and they will come to the same place. And that's why it's important to save areas which migratory birds use, because the flock can become totally disoriented if that area is not there. Okay, so we're part of the Central Asian flyway. There's also the East Asian Australasian flyway. You see the big red one right in the middle of the map. So that is the one which is more of East Asia. So that would be, you know, Singapore, Indonesia, all those places, Bangladesh, a little bit of India, that is Northeast India, is covered by this flyway. And then of course you have the African flyway. It's called the West Asian African, East African flyway. These are the ones which usually some of the birds will come. There's a bird known as Jacobean cuckoo. It comes probably from Africa to India. We're still trying to understand where birds come from. They know better than us. So, you know, BNHS as well as many other organizations have been satellite tagging birds to understand कहाँ से आते हैं, where do they come from, where do they go, where do they stop. And it's amazing that a small bird, you know, the smaller than a pigeon, can do 20,000 kilometers every year back and forth. So it's pretty amazing that way. And this talk is about birds, but I just wanted to point out that butterflies also do migrate. This is the emigrant butterfly. This is coming to Delhi from the Himalayas. And we probably also have butterflies coming to India from Nepal. In the US, there's this incredible butterfly known as the monarch butterfly, which is orange and black in color. And it will migrate from Canada to Mexico. And it can't make the entire trip in one lifetime, because it is a short-lived animal. But that's why 3 or 4 generations of butterflies will take birth and die in that one migration. So in fact, dragonflies migrate as well. The more we learn about the natural world, the more amazing it is. Who would have thought that a dragonfly migrates? But one of the reasons Amur falcons migrate as they do is because they tend to follow insects, which may also be migrating. So we'll more on that a little later. I want to point out that there's one migratory bird in India that used to come that doesn't come anymore. That was the Siberian crane. This is a map that shows you how the bird used to come. That was part of the Central Asian flyway. So we used to get the population that came over Iran and Pakistan, and on the right is the population that comes from China, comes to China, and that is the population that we have now. The one to India is extinct, sadly. It stopped coming in maybe 2002, and since then it has never come. And it's really a tragedy, because even now you go anywhere, people say Siberian crane. People think all the migratory birds come from Siberia, though that's not true. They come from all over Central Asia. They also come from Europe. But in the minds of people, a migratory bird means a Siberian bird. In the minds of people, a Siberian crane is a bird, you know, that they associate with. And oftentimes the Sarus crane, which is a bird of the fields of India, is often mistaken for Siberian crane. But the fact is, the Siberian crane is now extinct in India for many years. So how do we really go about conserving birds? It's really hard to do, isn't it? So let me give you a few numbers. There are 1,300 more than 1,300 bird species in India. There are more than 11,000 bird species in the world. And if we want to start conserving these wild creatures, then we need to probably prioritize, because India is a country with a lot of people. We're always fighting over land, we're fighting over resources, we're fighting over, uh, what shall we do with the land that we have. There always are people who need that land or need that resources. So we thought that it's good to make a prioritization. Which are the more important places? Can we start by protecting the more important places? Of course, conservationists would like all of India to be protected for wild animals, but probably that's not possible. So this is a piece of work that BNHS did, this map that you see. These are the important bird areas of India. And this was first made by Dr. Asad Rahmani and Zafarul Aslam, our colleague, in 2000s. And it was then updated recently in 2016. So we have more than 550 important bird areas in India. You can see it on the map. And if you get a broad idea, a lot of them are in the Himalayas, a lot of them are in Northeast, a lot of them are in the Western Ghats, and some of them are towards Eastern India. And basically, these are places which are very important for birds. For migratory birds, you see so much of the coastline has important bird areas. Those are typically places where shorebirds that migrate come to. Then you have important bird areas which are the last places for critically endangered birds as well. And so basically, if we lose these places, then we may lose the bird population. And it's also important to remember that when we study birds, we are trying to see what is the requirement of the species. So one of the things that climate change studies have shown us now is that birds are taking longer to migrate. They are either starting early, or they are reaching late. The entire passage of time that they take to migrate has increased because weather patterns have become so weird. So either it's becoming hot, or it's raining too much. You remember how it rained till December in Bombay. And therefore, as climate change makes itself more evident, a lot of the birds come from Arctic area to India as well. So Arctic is really warming up. So that's going to be a big problem for the birds. We need to ensure then that we have more migratory spots that birds can come to. So it's crucial today that the birds should have more places to rest in. Even if they don't eat over there, even if it's not a source of food for them, they should be able to forage and to just be able to rest, because birds today are dying of exhaustion. Now you can imagine a little thing that comes from so far, how exhausted it must be when it reaches, or even on the journey, because these are small animals at the end of the day. Most birds are small animals, and they come from really far distances, right? So we need to ensure that places for migratory birds increase rather than decrease. And some of these IPAs are also for land birds, such as the Great Indian Bustard. The Great Indian Bustard is a bird that is critically endangered, only about 100 left in India and the world, because almost the entire population is in India. In the Northeast, you have the white-bellied heron, of which we only have about 5 or 6 birds in India. Global population is about 60 birds. The white-bellied heron moves between Bhutan and India. The Great Indian Bustard moves between India and Pakistan. And this is where I want to get to my next point. I will just go straight to it. There's something known as the Convention on Migratory Species. The Convention on Migratory Species is a global treaty or a global agreement between different countries that we are going to conserve migratory species. So what happens if an animal moves from India to Bangladesh? Well, it shouldn't be shot. And you'll be surprised at the kind of things that do happen. So there was an elephant recently that had gone from India to Bangladesh, and it was shot over there. There's elephant movement between India and Nepal, but Nepal has put up a barrier to so that the elephants can't come into Nepal, because they don't want the elephants to eat their crops. Birds probably find it more easy to cross political borders because they can fly, but birds need a lot of help as well. Because if you look at our flyway, I'll go back to the map. This is our flyway, the red portion, Central Asian Flyway, these are some of the most populated countries in the world which are having a lot of development challenges. So you have China, you have India, you have Russia. These are big emerging economies which are basically going to keep growing for the next many years, and therefore it's really important that we work together. I cannot save the Siberian crane alone. And in fact, we have failed to save the Siberian crane in India, right? I cannot save the rosy starling alone. The rosy starling that comes to my house, if I have to save it, then I have to work in this flyway. So I'll have to work with Russia, with Mongolia, with Kazakhstan, with Nepal, and with India. So that is why we have the Convention on Migratory Species. If you look at the logo on the top, that is a pelican, and below the pelican, that is a dolphin or an orca. So Convention on Migratory Species is valid for all species that migrate. That includes animals like the whale, which is a marine mammal, the dugong, another marine mammal, turtles, which is a reptile, and of course birds as well. But birds are probably the best known as the migratory species, because birds, you can see them much more, and birds will also sometimes come together. Like the rosy starlings will come in a huge flock, they fly together and they stay together. Now, going back to what we are doing, so this was the map of the important bird areas. We're trying to prioritize that these are the places that we must save. These are the 550 places that we have to save, right? And we also have a national action plan now for the Central Asian Flyway. And in that, we have about 25 sites. You see the map on the right. So we have about 25 sites, which are really, really important for migratory birds, to save migratory birds in India. And, I just wanted to flag, before I come to the fun part, which is next to come, I just wanted to flag that, there are many issues that birds face. You'd be surprised, as to what are the issues that birds face. Birds get electrocuted a lot. You see that windmill over there? And the windmill will crush the birds in its blades. But windmills and solar power places also have wires, and birds will often get electrocuted on the wires. Birds will often get poisoned while eating things in fields, and birds are obviously losing habitat at a very, very fast pace. So on the coastline of India, you have a huge fight as to who should get the coast. Somebody wants to make a salt pan, somebody wants to make a port, somebody wants to make a power project, somebody wants to build a resort. So where does the bird go? The bird doesn't have a vote in any of this. So there are under the Convention on Migratory Species, there are all these resolutions that countries are working on together. So there is a resolution against the electrocution of migratory birds. So that would be minimizing impact from wires or any other source that is killing the birds. Then there's a resolution on wind turbines. This thing that you see at the back is a wind turbine. There's a resolution on power lines. And there's a resolution on renewable energy. And I just want to spend a minute telling you about renewable energy, because this is interesting. Renewable energy would be wind, solar, and we all think it's great, right? We think it's really green, it's really nice. But actually, renewable energy can be really dangerous because it's often planned in places where there are less people, meaning places with wildlife. So they plan it in the desert, which has the Great Indian Bustard, and the Great Indian Bustard is getting electrocuted on the wires for solar, power. And they plan, on coastlines. They make these huge windmills, which again they crush the birds, thousands and thousands of them together when those birds are migrating. So we need to make sure renewable energy is great, but we need to make sure it's put in the kind of place which it's not really badly impacting birds. We are part of a citizen science network. The birds that you see on the screen, these are uh, greater flamingos, and this is a picture actually taken during a flamingo survey. And I would urge all of you here to take part in citizen science initiatives, because it's really interesting and it's just a wonderful thing to learn. So citizen science is basically when citizens such as yourself can take part in scientific activities such as counting birds. such as making sure that the habitat is okay, making sure that checking out how many birds came this season, etc. So this flamingo count was done last year in February. We're going to have another one soon. We'll announce it. And so we went around counting how many flamingos that are there. If there's some people from Bombay, I know Bombay has thousands of flamingos. Delhi has about 500 maybe. But basically, many states in India took part, and we had 1,000 people taking part, and everybody told us, what are the flamingos, where are they found. So we could make a good map of where flamingos um, are in India. And let me tell you another interesting thing. Flamingos also migrate. So flamingos from Kazakhstan come to India. And some of them are resident. Some of the flamingos you'll see are actually living in India and they breed in India. And some of them come from other countries. So that's also really cool. And it's a really big bird, right? It's a big bird, and therefore it gets electrocuted really easily. So, I mean, you may be a little surprised to hear about wires killing birds, because you see birds sitting on wires. But if the bird is really big, it kind of makes a circuit on the wires and it will die, which is why it's such a big, wires are such a big threat to flamingos, to big birds like great Indian bustards, to birds of prey, which basically eat other birds. Usually they're bigger in size. So they are the ones who go first. And it's really sad because, generally people like birds, and for them to die like this, it's a very horrible kind of a death. Okay, let's talk about Amur falcons. I want to remind you that if you have questions, you can just write it in the chat box, and my colleagues will tell me what the question is. I'm happy to answer them as we go along. Okay, so the thing that you see on the screen, I showed this to some people and they thought it was a flock of mosquitoes or a group of insects, but actually that is a congregation, meaning a coming together of Amur falcons. And I did a survey over there. I couldn't go last year because of we had a wetland conference, but this is the year before, and I counted 100,000 Amur falcons, and there were so many of them that I couldn't count them visually. So we had to make a grid. I'm just going to show you how we count birds. So if you look at this picture, you can't count them, right? So it's really, when you're in nature, it's really difficult to actually get knowledge. You may think that it's easy. Even I thought it would be easy, but it's not. It's so difficult. So this is one part of the flock. Please understand, this is not the whole flock. But even for this flock, this picture, even if this is the only flock, how do I count these birds? There's so many. They're layers, right? So what we do is we walk a transect. A transect is basically a survey in a line. So you walk the transect at the same time, when every day, at the time that the bird is active. So for me, for the case of the Amur falcon, that would be early morning, like 4 o'clock in the morning, and around the time of sunset, which is also around 4 o'clock, 3:34, because this is Nagaland, the sun sets early. So around 4 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the evening is the time that I would walk the transect. And we would walk the transect and note the birds on the right and the birds on the left. So obviously you can't note in the sense that you can't take down numbers because there's too many of them. So we would take pictures, and we would take pictures of the entire flock as much as is possible. And then we make a grid, and we use a software called ImageJ, in which we superimpose these pictures on the software, and the software recognizes the birds from the outline. So this is 100,000 Amur falcons, which is probably the world's largest congregation of falcons in one place. Now, falcons are really interesting because usually falcons will eat meat, but the Amur falcons eat only insects, and they come here and they eat termites and they eat dragonflies, and they also follow the dragonflies as they migrate over the ocean. So from here, they are going to go towards Bombay. From Bombay, this is in October, so it'll come to Nagaland in October. It'll stay there for about a month, or maybe till early December. Then it'll go towards, it'll cross the Indian subcontinent. It may stop in Bombay or nearabouts, and then it will cross the Indian Ocean. Let me show you the map. I have the map here. It will cross the Indian Ocean um, to go towards Somalia and Southern Africa. So this is an incredible bird. And when it goes back, after winter is over, it will go over Europe. Sometimes it goes back on the same route, but sometimes it will go back over Europe. Most of the flocks have been observed to go over Europe. So that's 20,000 kilometers right there. Okay. So what was happening with the Amur falcons? So this is a beautiful illustration by John Gold, a famous illustrator. The male is the gray one on the left. The female is the one with spots, right? Usually in birds, females are less bright because they need to sit on the nest and take care of the chicks. She can't be seen very easily. Males normally have much brighter colors. So the male is a little bit more orange as well than the female, right? So what was happening? Why did we get into all of this? So in 2012, we got this information by Conservation India, which is a conservation NGO, that Amur falcons were being hunted in very, very large numbers in Nagaland. And so these are some of the images taken by our friends at Conservation India. That's a fishing net on the left, which in which the bird is caught. That's the male that's caught. And on the right, you have the way that the birds were being carried or transported. And you know, the thing is that bird hunting is something that happens not just in India, but in many parts of the world. But what was concerning is the fact that um, it was the numbers, it was just too much. So about 10,000 birds were being hunted every day. So about, I mean, when I went and met the hunters, each hunter said that he would hunt about 800 birds in one day, because that is also the number of birds that was available over there. And so we thought that if these birds are going to get hunted like this, then the species is going to end before we even know it, right? And as I go forward, I just want to caution everybody. We don't want to say somebody is bad or somebody is evil. I think the point is people have different cultures in different places. And it is to the credit of the Naga community in this part of the world, which they stopped hunting Amur falcons. And hunting is a tradition over there. So, you know, different people eat different kinds of food, and we don't eat falcons. Or some of us don't eat falcons, and some people do. Now, the only thing is that it is against the Wildlife Protection Act, and we need to. Conservation is a lot about not just about what is in the law, but it's also about what would be the right thing to do for the species. So conservation is also about culture. It's also about society. So when we went to this village, it's called Pangti village in Nagaland, the idea was just to talk to them. The idea was just to see what's happening and to talk to them and see, can we find a solution? Because we felt that we couldn't just let it be the way it is. And I know that even today, there are many places where a lot of birds are being hunted. And maybe, you know, one of the outcomes of this webinar could be that, you know, we could help each other in reporting such incidents, and also seeing what we can do as a next step in a way that it is accepted by the community, and in a way that it can sustainably stop, meaning we can find some other solution. So this is Doyang Reservoir. It's this beautiful Nagaland is just a most stunning place. I suggest, I recommend it to everyone. It's got these gorgeous hills and these beautiful mountains and forests. And you know, you see this land is completely owned by the community. And this reservoir is formed because of a dam that was made on the Doyang River. So this water is part of the Doyang River, and the birds are coming over the reservoir. So those are the Amur falcons, and they are basically over the water because the insects are coming over the water. So when you see this bird actually in the sky, you don't realize what it's doing because it just looks like a crazy bird. But what it's doing is actually hunting insects, and insects are so super fast that the bird has to be super fast as well. And therefore it is, you know, hunting, moving very, very fast, much faster than the eye can see. right? So these are the fishermen community actually was the one that was hunting the birds primarily. And again, I want to caution everybody to not to judge them in like making them the bad guys, because we're all bad guys in one way or the other. Different people do different things, different communities have different kinds of histories. So fishing is not considered hunting, right? But hunting of an animal is considered hunting. So for them, it was more like just taking something from the wild and just consuming that. Anyway, so we had a lot of meetings. A lot of this project has been having meetings, doing a lot of brainstorming and trying to understand what it is that the community needs. Now, as an NGO, we can't always give something. So we can't give them money to stop hunting. We can't build hotels for them, but we thought that we could start with doing eco clubs, and we could start with understanding the different sections within, or the groups, the target groups, the interest groups within the village. So typically the target group were the hunters and the fishermen, which is on the left, the photograph that I'm showing you. There's also a village council, which is the governance unit of the place. And in meetings with all of these people, what came out is basically that they wanted a source of income. They also wanted some facilities for the village, because the road is broken. There's no real facility that they have. They just make a living by farming their land and by hunting and fishing. And we cannot do conservation making people worse than they were, right? If we are to do conservation, then we also need to think of solutions which don't further disempower people. And that means it's a very slow process. And this is a huge challenge to conservation. How do we come up with solutions which don't make people worse off than they started, right? So we thought that one of the ways to address this is to have small ecotourism units, so that people could make a little bit of income. And more importantly, we wanted the community to see that there are so many people interested in conservation and interested to see birds, and to value the bird more as a live thing rather than as a dead thing. And so therefore some homestays have been started in that region. And we also are running eco clubs along with the NWBCT, which is the Nagaland Wildlife Biodiversity Conservation Trust, a local NGO. And the eco clubs run throughout the year, in which we're teaching the children a lot about nature, about citizen science, about people like you even, because we're trying to tell them that people all over India and all over the world are interested in conservation. So when I first went to the village, what the villager said to me, he said, "Why we come here? What do you do? Who are you?" He thought I've come from the government. And I said, um, I've come here to talk to you, and I've come here because I work with birds. And so he said, "Do you mean you eat them?" Because he couldn't believe that conservation is something that people do, right? So they all disbelieved me in the beginning, because they didn't know that uh, this is something that there are people in the world who care about conservation. Anyway, that was a long time ago. Now the villagers have completely stopped hunting, and this is to the credit of the village that they accepted what we were saying. And I did a piece of research as to why they accepted what we were saying, and many of the people had the same answer. They said that you the whole world thinks that we are savage people, that we are hunters, that we are so bad. We just want to prove that we can be more than what you think we are, that we can be more than our reputation. And we are doing this out of our own choice. So we want you to know that we are doing this out of our choice, because we don't want to be what you think we are, right? So that was great. And I think the whole crux of community conservation really is the community deciding for itself what it should be doing, and the community making that choice consciously, not you forcing them, because you can't force anyone to do anything. I think if somebody comes to your house and tells you to do something, your first responsibility, I'm not doing it, right? I wanted to show you this picture. This is a monolith. A monolith is a kind of mark of honor. It's kind of like a monument that is common in Nagaland, and they've made this monolith for the Amur Falcons, and they've named BNHS and other organizations on it. And basically, this is a pledge by Pangti village to not hunt. And I'm aware that there are many villages or many places that are still hunting birds, and what we would need to do over there is to have a few local people who are willing to work with us, who are willing to do the difficult and hard work of actually talking to people, listening to their problems and trying to find solutions. And this is a very big issue because non-governmental organizations cannot sort of give all the answers. Like the villagers keep saying, get our road made. You'll be surprised how difficult it is to get a road made in a place that's not a city. And their problems are very basic, and their problems are very relevant, such as not having any good transportation facility, not having jobs for the young people. So some of the people are now involved in ecotourism. And after the coronavirus thing is over, I urge everyone to go to places which are actually eco-tourist places with local communities running it, because that would be a direct contributor to conservation. So we don't want to give our money to hotels, which are already run by people who may not need the support, but we do want to support people who are actually from local communities trying to save the habitat as much as possible through ecotourism. I think we can take a bunch of questions now, and I'll come back to the slide just so that I don't miss anyone's question. How do we do this, Priyanka?
We'll be taking few.
Let's take a few questions now, and we'll take some more towards the end.